Hello and welcome to Lost Love Chronicles.
Dear listeners, before we get started, drop a quick hi in the comments and let us know where you're tuning in from. Also, if you have any suggestions for us to make the channel better, please let us know. Now let's start with the story. You're just a loser. Get out now, Dad roared right in front of my brother's girlfriend. Wait, you're the CEO of Technova? She whispered, eyes wide with shock as recognition dawned. My family froze, then doubled down, heaping more humiliation on me. So why won't you buy us a new house? Someone sneered. I said nothing. Instead, I calmly opened the gift box. Their faces drained of color. The dread began as it always did, a cold knot tightening in my stomach with every tick of the clock. Today was my father Roland's 60th birthday. For most families, it might have meant celebration. For ours, it was a performance, an obligatory illusion of togetherness that felt more like a hostage situation. I stared out the window of my small Seattle apartment. The overcast sky mirrored my mood. 13 years. 13 years since Mom Sienna had been taken from us, her life consumed by a cancer that moved with the violence and speed of wildfire. I was just 15 then, gangly, lost, and suddenly adrift in a world that no longer felt stable. Her absence left a hollow ache, a void that nothing could fill. I could still summon her if I tried. The lavender and old book scent that clung to her. The gentle strains of her favorite Chopin nocturnes floating from the living room. The warmth of her palm on my feverish forehead. Her illness was like a sudden storm ripping through our calm life, and part of me was swept away with her. The shift at home happened fast. Laura, Dad's secretary at the time, moved in just 6 months later. Her ambition had always lurked behind a sweet smile. If Dad grieved, it was brief and shallow, vanishing like morning mist in Lara's calculated sunshine. I remember her back, then methodically replacing Mom's presence. Sienna's photos quietly packed away. Generic art prints took their place. The fake kindness she showed me quickly wore thin. Her rehearsed sympathy dissolved into open impatience. In those early years, I tried to be what they wanted. I picked up extra chores, got a job shelving groceries. My back ached, hands blistered, but I handed Dad my first earnings with pride, thinking I was helping. He barely noticed. Lara's chirpy voice soon floated in from the kitchen, something about needing shoes for a gala. That $50 never reached the grocery fund. The label failure was first whispered, then spoken openly. My quietness, my love of coding and books dismissed as laziness. My passion for computer science? Just a waste of time. Still got your head in the clouds, Derek? Roland would say, disappointment thick in his voice. Your brother Jared just made captain of the football team. Try learning from him. Jared, 2 years younger than me, was the golden child, athletic, outgoing, the perfect embodiment of Dad's shallow ideals. He soaked up their praise like a sponge, thriving under the glow of their constant approval. For years, I held on to a fragile hope, a belief that if I just worked harder, endured more, they'd finally see me, acknowledge me. But that illusion shattered 3 years ago. It happened during a forced attic clear-out, supposedly for redecorating another one of Lara's schemes, pushed with her usual manipulative charm. Amid the dust and forgotten fragments of a happier past, I found a small, water-damaged cardboard box hidden deep in a corner. Inside were remnants of Mom things Lara had deemed worthless and ordered to be thrown out. My hands shook as I opened it. Beneath pressed flowers and yellowed letters was a small leather-bound diary. Most entries were simple, notes on her garden, dreams for my future, little bird sketches. But the final pages, written in a shaky, unsteady hand, made my blood run cold. She described persistent, worsening nausea after Lara began preparing her meals. A strange, metallic taste that lingered. A growing sense of unease about a new medication one Roland insisted she take, though her oncologist had never prescribed it or seemed aware of it. One line still haunts me. Elle watches me too closely, eyes calculating. Am I imagining it? Or is this house no longer safe for me? That was the spark. The dread in those words, paired with memories of hushed conversations I'd overheard after Mom died, Roland and Lara murmuring about everything going according to plan, and a fresh start ignited a deep, consuming suspicion. One so horrifying I could barely bring myself to acknowledge it. But it gave me purpose. To the world, I was Derek the failure. The quiet, awkward son who never measured up. What they didn't see were the long nights spent hunched over my laptop. The glow of its screen, the only light in my tiny apartment, as I funneled all my grief, rage, and fear into lines of code. From that fire, Technova was born, a company built from the ashes of my pain and the need to prove, even if only to myself, that I was more than the label they had given me. The early days were brutal. Every step forward came with stumbles, near failures, and sleepless nights. But slowly, the breakthroughs came, small victories that built into something greater. I kept everything private, fiercely so. My mother's digitized diary was backed up to multiple encrypted cloud servers. My research into her illness, potential misdiagnosis, and the substances she vaguely referenced became my quiet obsession. I ran it all from my modest apartment, surrounded by silence. There was no one to share in my victories or validate my growing dread. My family would have dismissed my discoveries, or worse, tried to use my success for their own gain. So I stayed silent and focused. When the phone call finally came, I wasn't surprised. Lara's voice oozed false sweetness. "Oh, Derek, darling. It's just a small family gathering for your father's 60th. You know how much it means to him. And we wouldn't want Jared's fiancée, Jocelyn, thinking we're not a perfectly normal, loving family, would we?" The manipulation, the saccharine concern for appearances, it was all so familiar. The old me would have hesitated, would have found an excuse to stay away. But this Derek, the one shaped by secrets and forged in sorrow, felt only a grim, focused determination. This year, I wasn't just a reluctant guest entering the lion's den, I was a harbinger, carrying a truth they had long buried. I chose a lavish-looking gift box, weighty and embossed, but left it completely empty. The real gift, the result of 3 years of meticulous investigation, was far more potent. Physical copies of incriminating documents, photographs, financial records, and a summary of expert medical opinions, all carefully organized. A secure, encrypted thumb drive containing duplicates sat safely in my pocket. Arriving at the family home that evening felt like stepping into a warped version of my childhood. The house I'd grown up in now seemed unfamiliar, colder somehow, despite the roaring fireplace. Every family photo on the walls, those I was either awkwardly shoved to the side in or absent from, felt like a silent rebuke. Lara had, naturally, redecorated. Her signature gaudy aesthetic was on full display. Too much gold, too many mirrors, and the air heavy with the cloying sweetness of her expensive perfume, a scent forever tied in my mind to manipulation. Roland was in the living room, holding court with his usual bluster, booming about his latest golf game while deliberately avoiding eye contact with me. Lara greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, all calculation behind the mask. Jared was there, of course, loud and charming, his laughter ringing out as he bragged to a young woman I assumed was Jocelyn, his new fiancée. She seemed pleasant and perceptive, and I noted, with a flicker of sympathy, how uncomfortable she appeared. The stage was set. Dinner unfolded just as I'd expected, a masterclass in passive aggression, a feast of humiliation served on Lara's finest china. Jared formally introduced Jocelyn. She had kind eyes, alert and intelligent, and seemed to pick up on the tension crackling beneath the surface. She tried to draw me into conversation, asking about my work with genuine curiosity that briefly caught me off guard. "Derek works with computers, dear," Lara cut in smoothly, her voice laced with condescension before I could do more than smile politely. "A little hobby of his. Jared's company is flying him to a conference in Hawaii next month," she added pointedly. "Isn't that exciting?" Roland cleared his throat, puffing up. "Some are leaders, some are followers, Jocelyn. That's just life." Derek?" He didn't wait for a response before launching into another self-congratulatory tale about Jared's career. "Yeah, Derek," Jared said with a smirk, glancing at Jocelyn and clearly enjoying his spotlight. "Still waiting for that big break from your tinkering? Or are you bussing tables these days to pay the bills?" My chest tightened, breath catching in that all-too-familiar, barbed wire grip. Every inhale became a conscious effort. I focused on the condensation sliding down my water glass, the silverware's gleam under Lara's vulgar crystal chandelier, anything to anchor myself, to keep my composure from cracking. "Just breathe. It's almost time," I reminded myself, the words a silent chant. I pictured Mom's face, her soft smile, a distant and steady light in the storm of their contempt. The meal dragged on, each course marked by fresh jabs: my modest apartment, my solitary life, my non-traditional work. It was all fair game for their amusement, their smug pity. Jocelyn, to her credit, looked increasingly uneasy. She made several gentle attempts to change the subject, to steer the evening into safer waters. But Roland and Lara were relentless, their words like 1,000 tiny needles. And finally, after what felt like an eternity, Lara clapped her hands together with forced cheer. "Presents time." Roland opened the gifts from Jared and Lara with exaggerated enthusiasm, an outrageously expensive watch, a first edition of his favorite author's work, each unwrapped with theatrical flair and met with performative gasps. Then his attention turned to me. He gave a dismissive wave of his hand. "Well, Derek, don't tell me you forgot your old man's birthday after all these years," he said, his tone dripping with expectation and mock disappointment. I rose quietly and retrieved the simple, elegant box I'd brought, placing it on the table in front of him. He let out a soft snort of contempt, clearly unimpressed by its understated design compared to the glitzy gifts he'd just received. I saw a cutting remark begin to form in the taut line of his mouth, but he seemed to think better of it, perhaps for Jocelyn's benefit. "Well, let's see what masterpiece you've conjured up this time," he said, sarcasm curling around every word. He began unwrapping the box slowly, milking the moment. That's when the tension finally snapped. Maybe it was the buildup of years of scorn, or maybe the sight of that empty box symbolizing everything he believed I lacked triggered it. But something in Roland broke. His face turned an alarming shade of purple, a vein bulging in his temple. Then he exploded. "You know what?" he bellowed, his voice rattling the wine glasses and sucking the air out of the room. "I've had enough of this charade. Year after year, you're an embarrassment. You bring nothing to this family, contribute nothing. You're a loser, Derek. A complete and utter failure. Get out. Get out of my house. Now." Laura quickly jumped in, nodding with fervor, her eyes lit with something cruel. "Yes, Roland, he's upsetting everyone, especially on your special day. He doesn't belong here." Jared looked away, feigning interest in the pattern of his napkin, a silent accomplice to my expulsion. A strange calm washed over me then, a quiet stillness before the storm. My heart thundered in my chest like a bird slamming against a cage, but outwardly, I remained composed. I stood slowly, hands steady, my expression calm. The air in the room felt charged, crackling with tension. Jocelyn's wide eyes darted between Roland's flushed face and mine, her expression a mixture of shock and confusion. I turned to leave, choosing silence over confrontation. But then Jocelyn spoke, her voice low and hesitant, slicing through the oppressive quiet like a blade. "Wait, Derek Mitchell, are you the CEO of Technova?" The room froze. Roland, Laura, and Jared stared at her, stunned. Their faces twisted into masks of disbelief. Roland's purple hue drained into a ghostly white. Lara's mouth hung open, her lipstick-smudged lips parting as she grabbed Jared's arm for support. Jared blinked, confused and uncomprehending. You could have heard a pin drop, or maybe just the collective thud of 3 jaws metaphorically hitting the Persian rug. Still unaware of the seismic shift she'd triggered, Jocelyn continued, brow furrowed in thought. "Technova Solutions. The AI integration company. I saw an interview with you in Wired a few months ago. It had your picture. I thought you looked familiar, but I couldn't place it at first." A heavy silence followed. Then, predictably, Laura was the first to recover. Her eyes, so recently filled with disdain. Lara's eyes now gleamed with a new, predatory light. She breathed, her voice thick with shock and dawning greed. "Derek, darling, why didn't you say anything?" Roland followed close behind, his fury vanishing as if it had never existed, replaced by a slick, ingratiating grin. "A CEO? Well, so that little computer hobby finally paid off, eh?" He turned to Jared with theatrical cheer. "Did you hear that? Your brother's a CEO." He clapped Jared on the back with a forced camaraderie that made my stomach churn. Moments ago, their faces had been twisted in contempt. Now they were lit with greedy anticipation. The shift was grotesque and depressingly familiar. They hadn't changed. Only their perception of my usefulness had. "Well, Derek," Laura began, her voice dripping with sickly sweet affection, "now that you're clearly doing so well, you can finally contribute to this family properly. We've been dreaming of a bigger house for years. Something with a pool. Maybe a vacation to Europe? First class, of course, to celebrate your success." "Exactly," Roland chimed in, fully recovered. His tone was now puffed up with proprietary pride. "A son looks after his parents, provides for them. It's about time you showed some real gratitude for everything we've done for you. That shoebox apartment you live in is probably a dump. Why don't you buy us a proper family estate? It's the least you can do." Jared, catching the cue, jumped in eagerly. The smirk he'd worn earlier had shifted into something sharper, more calculating. "Yeah, Derek, I've been toying with this new business idea. All I need is a little seed money, couple $100,000 or so, and I could really get things going." Their voices started talking over each other, creating a noisy mix of demands and expectations. People waved their hands, their faces showing how hungry they were. You could really feel their desperation. I said nothing. I simply watched their contempt dissolve into raw avarice, watched the grotesque ballet of shifting masks. And when I didn't respond, when my silence stretched on, Roland's temper began to spark anew. "What?" he barked, his voice rising. "You think you're too good for us now, Mr. Big Shot CEO?" His face started to redden again. "If you're not going to share your good fortune with the people who raised you, then you're no son of mine. Get out, I mean it this time. Get out and don't come back until you've learned some respect." His finger jabbed toward the front door, voice reaching a fever pitch. Laura and Jared quickly added their own renewed outrage to the growing din. But I raised my hand. It was a small, quiet gesture, yet it sliced through their tirade, stilling the room in an instant. Actually, Father, I said, my voice low but carrying clearly in the charged silence, you haven't opened your real gift yet. Turning away from their stunned faces, I walked back to the dining table. The elegant, understated box I'd set down earlier still sat untouched, overlooked amid the drama. I picked it up again, each movement deliberate, my pace unhurried. Jocelyn watched me, her eyes filled with a strange mix of apprehension and awe. My family faltered, momentarily thrown by my unexpected composure by this deviation from the script they believed they controlled. I set the box down before Roland. Roland stared at it, then at me. There was a flicker in his eyes now, something that looked suspiciously like unease. Maybe even fear. Laura, ever the opportunist, recovered first. Well, open it, Roland, she urged, her voice just a shade too high, too bright forced. Maybe it's the keys to our new car, Laura chirped, her voice strained with false excitement. Or perhaps a down payment for the house. Roland fumbled with the silk ribbon, his typically sure hands now oddly clumsy. At last, he lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of black satin, lay a small, old-fashioned silver locket, my mother's. I watched as his breath caught. Beneath it, tied with a solemn black ribbon, was a neat stack of photographs. He picked them up, his brow knitting in confusion. Laura leaned in for a closer look, the color draining from her face. Her hand shot up to her mouth, nails biting into her palm. These weren't recent pictures. They were old, faded slightly with age, clearly taken over 13 years ago. The images captured Roland and Laura, younger then, in various intimate moments, embracing by a lakeside, laughing together at a candlelit dinner, kissing in what appeared to be a hotel garden. Several were time-stamped before my mother's cancer diagnosis. Others were from the harrowing months she was battling the disease. I believe these were taken while Mom was still alive, I said, my voice cold and steady, stripped of the turmoil churning inside me. While she was at home, trusting you were caring for her. While you, Laura, were posing as her devoted friend and dad's supportive colleague. Roland stared at the photos, stricken, his face a patchwork of guilt and disbelief. He looked to Laura, then back to me, unable to speak. Laura began to cry a high-pitched, theatrical wail. It wasn't like that, she insisted shrilly. We were just close. He was grieving, I was only trying to comfort him. Jared looked stunned, his eyes flicking between his mute father and sobbing stepmother, his expression one of dawning horror. Jocelyn sat pale and silent, her gaze fixed on her lap, the discomfort radiating off her in waves. And these, I continued, nodding toward the next layer in the box, are financial records and legal documents. Beneath the damning photographs lay a neatly organized stack of papers. I spoke evenly, explaining how they detailed the siphoning of funds from my mother's estate, the trust she had carefully established for my education and future. The same trust both Roland and Laura claimed had been exhausted when I turned 18, just when I needed it most. I described how I had traced the trail, account by account, uncovering the shell corporations they used to launder the money that paid for Jared's private school, his new cars, their luxury vacations. All while I juggled part-time jobs, scraping by in community college, surviving on instant noodles, and being lectured for my supposed lack of ambition. My college fund, I said flatly, the one Mom worked so hard to build for me, paid for your Lexus, Laura. It paid for your golf club membership, Dad. It paid for Jared's Cancun spring break trip. He said it was covered by a scholarship. Roland slumped back in his chair, as if struck. The documents slipped from his hands, drifting to the floor. Lara's protests grew shrill and panicked. He's lying. These are forgeries. Derek was always a difficult, ungrateful child. He's trying to ruin us. But her voice cracked, her eyes wild and darting toward the door like a trapped animal seeking escape. It was textbook gaslighting, a desperate attempt to rewrite the narrative, to paint me as the villain. It took me 3 years, Dad, I said, my voice quiet but firm, ringing with finality. 3 years. That's how long it took. 3 years of late nights, combing through old bank statements, meeting with financial analysts, finding a lawyer, Mr. Harrison, who was willing to help me subpoena the right records. It's all there. Every transfer, every signature, every betrayal. At the very bottom of the box, beneath the damning financial documents, rested one final envelope, a sealed, heavy manila one, unmarked except for 2 words, Medical Sienna Mitchell. Roland stared at it, as if it might strike. The blood had drained from his face, leaving it the ashen gray of wet stone. Laura, her hysterics now silenced, sat frozen, breathing in shallow gasps, eyes locked on that envelope with undisguised fear. And this my voice lowered, heavy with what I was about to reveal. This has to do with Mom's diary. I felt the air shift thicker now, like the room itself was bracing for impact. She wrote about those final weeks. About the constant nausea. The metallic taste in her mouth that began after you started helping with her meals, Laura. About the strange new medication you insisted on. Dad, the one her actual oncologist, Dr. Ashford, had no knowledge of when I finally managed to contact him. I paused. Let the silence expand. Let the weight of the truth settle. With Mr. Harrison's help, I legally obtained Mom's full medical records. I shared them, along with her diary entries, with an independent team, a respected oncologist and a forensic toxicologist. I slid the envelope across the gleaming mahogany table. The sound it made as it moved, crisp, deliberate, was the only noise in the room. They found discrepancies. Symptoms inconsistent with the known progression of her cancer. But those same symptoms, I said quietly, match another condition, chronic poisoning. Specifically, exposure to thallium. Tasteless, odorless, slow-acting. If given in small, repeated doses, it can mimic other illnesses, worsen existing ones. And unless you're specifically looking for it, it's almost impossible to detect. Testing like that was never done. Roland's face had gone ghostly pale. His mouth opened, but no words came. Laura was visibly shaking now, her eyes flicking back and forth between the envelope and me like a trapped animal. Even Jared, who until then had watched the financial accusations with detached discomfort, now sat rigid, his gaze full of raw disbelief and disgust. The illusion, the carefully crafted image of a happy, respectable family hadn't just cracked. It had disintegrated, exposing everything they had worked to bury. The report, I said softly, my voice barely louder than a breath, suggests the thallium, or something like it, may have caused a rapid deterioration in Mom's condition, or at the very least, sped up her decline. It recommends a full investigation. I turned my attention to Laura. It also includes a sworn affidavit from Mrs. Peterson, a nurse from Mom's hospice. She remembered how insistent you were, Laura, about personally giving Mom certain herbal supplements, ones not listed in her treatment plan. Ones you called family remedies. Then, at last, I looked at my father. He looked utterly shattered. Happy birthday, Dad. The words tasted bitter. My attorney, Mr. Harrison, has compiled a comprehensive report. He's filing a formal complaint regarding the financial misconduct. Detective Radcliffe with the Seattle PD is expecting it. I imagine he'll have quite a few questions for both of you. I let the final words hang in the stillness. And I wouldn't be surprised if they reopen the investigation into the true cause of Mom's death. I then turned to Jocelyn, who sat stiffly upright, her face frozen in shock and dismay. Jocelyn, I said gently, I'm truly, deeply sorry you had to witness this. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum, draining all sound and air from the room. And then, as if a spell had been broken, chaos erupted. Laura let out a series of short, piercing shrieks, more animal than human, before collapsing into a heap of wrenching sobs. Her carefully maintained composure shattered instantly. Fragments of the persona she'd clung to scattering across the floor. Roland didn't scream. Instead, a strange gurgle emerged from deep in his throat as he slumped into his chair, one hand clutching his chest, his face twisted in a grotesque mixture of pain and raw terror. Jared, ghostly pale, could only stare. His wide, unblinking eyes suggested he couldn't even begin to process what was happening around him. With deliberate calm, I took out my phone. Mr. Harrison is filing the formal complaint with the authorities right now, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Detective Radcliffe has been briefed. He should be arriving soon for preliminary questioning. As if on cue, the doorbell chimed, its bright, melodic tone jarringly out of place in the horror that had consumed the room. Lara's sobbing grew more frantic. Roland seemed to collapse further inward, a hollow shell of the man he'd once pretended to be. I noticed Jocelyn quietly retrieve her own phone, her fingers moving rapidly across the screen. Whether she was calling someone or documenting the moment, I didn't know. I didn't ask. I didn't care. I didn't stay to watch the officers arrive, first in uniform, then in plain clothes. I didn't need to see their expressions shift as they took in the gravity of what they were stepping into. This house built on deception and decay. As the first officer crossed the threshold with solemn authority, I simply said, my lawyer will handle everything from here. Then I turned and walked out. Outside, the cool night air hit my face like a baptism, cleansing, bracing, and real. It washed over me, stripping away 13 years of silence, pain, and buried truths. Behind me, Lara's voice screeched in protest, he's mad. He's always been a liar, a troubled boy, followed by what sounded like Roland collapsing even further into his chair, or perhaps to the floor. But I kept walking. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. The unbearable weight I had carried for over a decade finally began to lift. The months that followed blurred together legal motions, depositions, interviews, endless strategy sessions with Mr. Harrison. Through it all, he remained a steady presence. Calm, kind-eyed. I learned he had known my mother years ago, from a charity committee they'd both volunteered for. He had admired her. He told me her quiet strength, her grace. That memory and the strength of the evidence I brought forward were what moved him to take my case first pro bono, then on contingency, once the scale of the fraud became clear. She would be proud of you, Derek, he said one afternoon, after a long meeting with the district attorney. Proud of your courage, your resolve. For the first time, hearing those words, I believed them. The financial case against Roland and Laura was clear. The evidence left no room for doubt. The investigation into my mother Sienna's death, however, was far more complex and far more painful. It was a slow, painstaking excavation of the past. News that prominent local businessman Roland Mitchell and his wife Laura were under investigation for massive financial fraud, and, more darkly, that there were renewed suspicions surrounding the death of his first wife spread like wildfire through their affluent social circles and the broader Seattle community. The polished public image they had so carefully curated was torn apart, exposing the rot beneath. So-called friends vanished overnight. Their reputation, meticulously built on lies and stolen wealth, crumbled completely. Jared was swept up in the chaos. Though he wasn't directly implicated in the crimes, the stain of association was unavoidable. His lavish lifestyle, after all, had been funded by the very inheritance that had been stolen. Unsurprisingly, his engagement to Jocelyn ended. She couldn't reconcile the charming, driven man she thought she loved with the reality of his origins tainted by deceit and corruption. He texted me once, a desperate, pleading message. I didn't know, Derek. I swear I had no idea about any of it. I never replied. I'd come to understand that Jared's ignorance had been a choice in easy, willful blindness that allowed him to benefit without ever asking hard questions. That choice was his burden to bear. The legal consequences for Roland and Laura were severe. Both were convicted on multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement, receiving substantial prison sentences. The family home, a towering symbol of their greed, was seized and sold to repay debts and restitution. The investigation into Sienna's death remained open. While there wasn't enough to support a murder conviction after so many years, the evidence circumstantial, though powerful, the official cause of death was revised. No longer listed as natural causes, it was now classified as suspicious circumstances, cause undetermined, pending further evidence. Their public disgrace and the unshakable suspicion that followed them became a justice of its own. Their old lives were over. If it was a victory, it was a hollow one. There was no joy in their downfall, only a sober, grim satisfaction that truth, no matter how long it's buried, eventually demands to be heard. The real battle, I found, was healing the 15-year-old version of myself, the boy who'd been told, in 1,000 subtle and overt ways, that he was worthless. A failure. I began therapy, finally allowing myself to process years of emotional abuse and to grieve for my mother. I'd lost her twice, first to illness, and again to the crushing truth of what had really happened. To honor her memory in a way that felt honest and meaningful, I used a portion of the recovered funds, surprisingly substantial, once their assets were fully untangled, to found the Sienna's Garden Foundation, a small nonprofit dedicated to building and maintaining community green spaces in underserved Seattle neighborhoods. A tribute to my mother's love for her own little garden, the place where she found peace. Slowly, cautiously, I began to rebuild. Jocelyn, after cutting ties with Jared and everything he represented, reached out. We met for coffee, then lunch. There was no romance, but something even more lasting emerged, a genuine friendship rooted in honesty and mutual respect. She became an unexpected ally, someone who had seen the worst of my past and hadn't turned away. And my team at Technova, who had known me only as their focused, sometimes distant CEO, surrounded me with quiet, steadfast support. They were more than colleagues. They became friends. And in that, I found the beginnings of something real, something new. A year later, life had settled into a new rhythm. Technova continued to flourish, but its success no longer defined who I was. I found peace in the simpler moments, the quiet satisfaction of solving a problem, the camaraderie of my team, the vibrant green of the first community garden blooming through the Sienna's Garden initiative. I visited my mother's grave regularly, often bringing a small bouquet of lavender, her favorite. Most of the legal battles were behind me. Roland and Laura were imprisoned, now reduced to distant echoes of a painful past. Their power over me had finally been broken. I came to understand that my real success wasn't measured by Technova's market value or the punishment meted out to those who hurt me. It lay in the quiet strength I had discovered, the strength to reclaim my life, to own my story. It lay in the peace that came from learning to value myself. I realized that boundaries weren't walls meant to shut others out, but protective lines that preserve the sacred space within. They tried to bury me, to erase me, but they didn't realize I was a seed, growing in the dark, pushing toward the light. Not every question from those dark years has a clear or complete answer. The full truth of my mother's final days may always remain clouded by a painful shadow. But exposing their true character, reclaiming what was stolen, and publicly acknowledging the deep injustice done to her, and to me, that was enough. Justice, I've learned, wears many faces. This journey has been about breaking free from a toxic legacy and shaping a future of my own making. It meant unearthing painful truths, but that was still lighter than living with silence and unacknowledged betrayal. It makes me wonder, what invisible chains might you be carrying, forged from old family wounds or unspoken pain? And what would it take, what act of courage, what truth finally spoken for you to find your own freedom? Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.